So this year makes me pretty excited actually because it's growing season, and when most people talk about growing season, they're talking about getting their raised beds ready to go and planting vegetables and all that fun stuff. But when Shauna and I converse about growing season, we are more or less talking about the threat of being overgrown by everything under the sun. Living on our farm, when we hit what we consider growing season, everything starts growing. Grass starts growing, poison ivy starts growing, weeds start growing, everything starts growing like crazy. And ever since we have lived here, since 2014, every time we hit the beginning of growing season, something is broken on our farm. I mean, something that we need to maintain the property is broken. We have had on our channel over 500,000 views of people watching videos from me repairing basically lawn equipment or yard equipment, or even, I guess I'm including some tractor repairs in there. Basically repairs that I have had to do in order to have the equipment to maintain our property. And that makes me happy. I mean, 500,000 views, over, I think it's 550,000 views have come from those types of videos, which isn't a lot of views, but for a channel our size with about 3 million views, that's actually pretty significant. But it really makes me happy because I can actually look at Shauna the next time something breaks and say, there are over 500,000 other people with this problem. So it really warms my heart to know that I'm not the only one out there who has problems with their lawn equipment. I will say that we have become a lot more proficient with repairing things as the years have gone by, and that might be part of the reason why everything's working right now, is because I was faster at fixing it, so things didn't remain broken. Anyway, without all those repair videos and repairs that I have to make, you'd probably be wondering what I plan on doing this year. You've seen our chicken coop videos that we've been putting out. We've still got some work to do on that. I want to call them our medium-aged chickens, not the baby chicks that are in the house, but the ones that were in the house before them, that were then in our living room and then on the front porch. They have begun to move into that chicken house. So while they're kind of acclimating to that area, I'm not going to work on the chicken house, and just kind of give them some time to get used to that being their safety zone before we let them out into the yard. And then as we give them more freedom to range, I can go back and finish up that chicken house. But we've pretty much got it enclosed, and the roof's on it. We've come a long way with our chicken house. So what I wanted to talk to you today about was chainsaw blades, because chainsaw blades aren't all, or chainsaw chains, like the blade is just the little chisel on it. They aren't all created equal, and by that I mean they are all designed to have different purposes. And you've probably gone to the store at some point, bought a very expensive large chainsaw, and then brought it home and felt like you were very unimpressed with the way it cut. And a lot of that is just because of the type of chain, not the chainsaw itself. And so I wanted to talk about the chains and what they're used for. This chain here is a typical consumer chainsaw. If I were to go to Lowe's to buy a replacement chain, this chain is most likely the chain that Lowe's would sell me. And it's not the best chain. It has its purpose, and I'm going to explain to you what those purposes are in a second. But what you need to realize is that when you buy consumer chainsaws, or you buy from a consumer source, and even Husqvarna, their original equipment is going to have what they call, they're either Semi-Chisel or they're low kickback chains, basically. And what that means is that if you compare this chain that I'm holding here, there's a notch right there, and I'll do some close-ups to show you the differences. It's creating, it's not cutting quite as quickly. It's giving some resistance. This is a safety mechanism that will help if the chain hits you, and it also helps to keep the chainsaw from kicking back on a piece of wood. So you've probably heard of chainsaw kickback and you've thought, well, my chainsaw doesn't really do that. It's because you're using one of these chains. And these chains come standard on most chainsaws. They're not bad chains if you're doing a lot of yard cleanup and you're moving the chainsaw around a lot for safety reasons. It's not a bad chain to have. I would actually be running this chain today because I'm going to be doing yard cleanup, but the chain needs to be filed. I've nicked some spots along it. I'll probably do a video on sharpening and cleaning this chainsaw up so that it's usable. The other nice thing about this chain is that it's less picky when it comes to sharpening. You don't have to have your angle exactly correct, but the big negative of this chain is that it does take, how did I do that? I don't know how, I just managed to do that. There we go. The big thing about this chain is that it does, while it doesn't have to be sharpened precisely to precision to make it work right, again, it's a consumer chain. The issue that I think you're going to run into with it is that it's not going to cut as quickly as the other chains, and so you're going to put more wear on your chainsaw. This is a chain that is designed for non-professional use. It's designed for the average homeowner. It takes longer to dull. It's easier to sharpen, has low kickback, but it is not a professional cutter. These chains are also good, and if you're doing work on some dirty wood or soft wood, these chains are fantastic. But again, it's not going to impress you as a chain. The next chain I have here, well, I'm going to go to this chain here. This chain is what I'm going to put on there today. This is a full-chisel chain. So this chain is this is a full round chisel chain, and basically that's a lot more aggressive than the consumer chain. It's got a full chisel, but it's a little rounded. That rounding helps out as far as when you're dealing between softwoods and hardwoods. It's going to be able to clean the chain out a little easier. It's a little easier to sharpen than your kind of more aggressive, just flat chisel. I think Oregon has what they call the Chandler chisel, but this is a power cut blade, so it's still going to cut very quickly. You'll see that the little curve in front, I forget what this is called, of the main chisel is smaller than on the consumer chain, and so basically what that means is you're going to have an opportunity for more kickback. If this swings out of control, it's going to do a lot of damage. It's a lot less safe because it doesn't have those safety features that the other chain has, but it's going to cut faster. It's going to put less wear on the chainsaw. It's a more suitable chain for somebody who uses their chainsaw frequently and has more experience operating a chainsaw than the consumer grade chainsaw. This is where you're going to start noticing the power of your equipment, is when you get into some of these more aggressive chains. Now this chain is kind of a standard chain sold at a professional landscape supply. So if I were to go to an Echo dealer or a Husqvarna dealer or a Stihl dealer, chances are most of their chains are going to be these round chisel, full chisel chains. And they're going to be a lot more aggressive than the consumer chain that you will get if you go to a store like Lowe's or Home Depot, or if you just use the chain that came on your chainsaw from Husqvarna. That's going to be a less aggressive chain. Now the other chain that I have here, and there's very slight differences. I'm kind of amazed by this. Very slight differences between this one and the chisel chain. I will say that the chisel chain is a little sharper on the and more square on the backside curve. That's giving you a little more cutting power. This one kind of narrows, but this one is what they call a ripping chain. This chain is going to be a little cleaner. It's still very aggressive. It is a chain that you would use on a chainsaw mill. What is it? A chainsaw mill is basically, this is one right here. This is a Grainger chainsaw mill. So if you would have your chainsaw in here, and I'll do some videos on these, and basically use this as a mill. So when the chainsaw is in here, it's pretty locked into place. It's not going to go anywhere. So that chain is going to be a much more aggressive chain. It's not something that you don't want to use a ripping chain when you're just doing yard work and things like that, because it doesn't have the cutting and safety features as normal chains. You're probably going to have a lot more kickback on a ripping chain, but it's designed to be inside a contraption like this. It's not designed to just be used cutting tree branches. It's going to dull faster as well. So the ripping chain is definitely not a consumer chain. It's a specialty chain, and I'll try and show you some close-ups of these. This one is very slight differences between the chisel chain. There's a much larger difference between this Full-Chisel chain and the consumer chain. And again, if you compare the ripping chain up against the consumer chain, you're going to see some big differences there as well. So those are 3 different chains. When you're looking at chainsaw chains, you also want to consider, so they have what they call skip tooth. I'm not sure, none of these I don't think are a full skip tooth, but if you have a skip tooth chain, what that means is it's skipping a link for the blade. That's going to cut a lot more aggressively as well, and that again is more of a professional chain. It's not something that I really have a use for, so I don't have one here. Looking at these chains and the different chains that I have with these chainsaws, there are some things that I have noticed in looking at some of these chains that are on these older chainsaws. Number one, the teeth on this Craftsman are very odd. It's almost like it has on the chisel 2 different lengths of the chisel, and I'm guessing that the cutting power of this chainsaw, I'm not sure how that's gonna really be effective, because when you have a full flat surface for the chain to dig into the wood, this one seems to have like a small part of the chisel, and then it kind of shapes back to another small area of the chisel. I would think, maybe the design is so that as it goes into the wood, it starts to cut in a little smaller and then rips through with the bigger chunk. So it could work very well on some harder wood to cut, but I don't know what you would classify this chain on this chainsaw as. It's a very interesting chain. I'm not sure how aggressive it's going to be, but when I get this sharpened up, I'll definitely give it a whirl and see how well this chain design works. But you can definitely see the difference between the chain on this chainsaw and the chains I'm using on the Husqvarna 460. Moving on to the smaller chainsaw here, we have a Semi-Chisel. Again, it still has a little bit of a larger safety. Again, I don't know what that's called. Just the little piece that sticks up in front here, and that again this is a low kickback chain. It's basically a consumer chain that's on this chainsaw, and and that's fine, because this is the chainsaw that Shauna will use, or I'll use very quickly to cut something, and I don't spend a lot of time sharpening or working with this chainsaw. It just, it's something that I pick up quickly when I need to use it, and I'm not as careful with it as I am the big 460. So I like the fact that we keep a consumer chain on this chainsaw. It's just a little, it's just got a little more of a safety mechanism on the chain to help with the kickback, and if for some reason it does swing to cut you, it's gonna reduce the amount that it's gonna be able to cut into you. as quickly. This Craftsman chain, it feels very aggressive when I run my finger across the top of it, but it also it looks just like a nasty chain. I'm not sure how clean of a cut I'm going to get with that. So those are just some basic differences of chains that I have here that I can show you. If you're wondering what kind of chain to get, they're on the back of an Oregon box. They usually list the different types of chains. If you go to their website, it'll tell you what chain you should be using for which type of project, which chains should be professional only, and that'll really depend on the safety of the chain. If it's a very unsafe chain, it's obviously not something that they're going to recommend for consumers, but anybody can buy any chain they want. They also make chains specifically for carving. So if you're trying to get into chainsaw carving, you're going to want, number one, you're going to want a carving bar, which has a narrower kind of tip to it, and then you're also going to want a carving chain. So again, that's not going to be the same type of chain as any of these. If you do get into chains other than your consumer chain, I would suggest, instead of using the little handheld chisels to sharpen your chainsaw, you invest in a more accurate sharpening device. This is about $30, and I'll do, as I sharpen some chainsaws, I'll show you how this works, but this will basically sit on the bar of the chainsaw while the chain is on it. You can adjust the angle and precisely sharpen the chain the way it needs to be sharpened. I'll also be putting out a video shortly on how to size the chain for your chainsaw so that you can make sure that you're buying the right size, because there are a lot of different size measurements to consider, and that'll tell you what type of chain to get for your chainsaw.